Okay, welcome back everyone. This is the final session, so we've got two more talks coming up, and we're going to start off by heading over to Maynooth University over in Ireland. We've got James O'Malley, he's going to be leading the talk, and he's going to be doing the talk with Pádhraic O'Hanrahan and Rachel O'Neill, so take it away.
Thank you. Thanks a million, Lawrence, and thanks a million to everybody else so far. It's been really interesting day. Actually, so much of what we'll talk about in this talk, we might need to revisit after some of the ideas we've gotten. But myself and Pádhraic are going to outline some steps we took in Maynooth University. Myself and Rachel O'Neill have been involved in a project over the last year to try and help retention of computer science students in mathematics. And Pádhraic is one of the lecturers who's run a study group initiative, or a group initiative with one of his lectures. So the study group initiative that we started, we set it up in last year, in the first semester of last year, and it was part of a Higher Education Authority funded project. The Higher Education Authority ran a report and found that retention rates among computer science students were quite low. Across the sector, they were about 55%. And the low levels of retention were related to low engagement in mathematics. So part of our project in Maynooth University is aimed at improving the computer science students' engagement with maths. And one of the ways we did this was by setting up a study group initiative in the Math Support Centre. So we had groups of about 4 to 5 first and second year computer science students who met weekly in the Math Support Centre. And the intention was to create more structured and proactive learning communities. We focus grouped some previous computer science students before the project began. And by speaking to them and looking at some of the data, we found that computer science students were actually engaging almost on par with their peers, but their quality of engagement wasn't as good. So they were submitting as many assignments, but their marks were lower. They were attending the MSc as often, but spending less time there. So part of the goal of these study groups was to improve their quality of engagement when they sit down to do maths. The groups were student led, so students were responsible for arranging their times, meeting up in person in the MSc, and leading the discussion. So what did they work on that week? What did they have trouble with, etc. But a tutor, myself or Rachel, checked in with them once a week, make sure that everything was going okay and that they were working correctly. So attendance was optional, and across first semester and start of second semester, we had 11 groups signing up in total. Some preliminary data from the end of the first semester was quite encouraging. The study group mean, so their mean grade in their first calculus course was substantially higher when compared to non-study group people. But even regardless of that, some of the feedback that we got was quite positive in terms of the engagement. So students reported feeling more confident about maths and being more confident to work on it on their own at home, and a bit of that community responsibility as well. So some of them reported making sure that they had work done before they came into their study group, so that they had something to talk about with the group and to contribute to the group. So all that was extremely encouraging. And much like everything else, everything was going swimmingly until the COVID lorry rolled into town. So Maynooth University campus closed down on the 13th of March. And departmental tutorials and MSc support, so Math Support Centre support as well, moved online to Microsoft Teams and online Moodle forums, which is our virtual learning environment. We made moves to move our study groups online, but unfortunately these weren't successful. Sign up for the actual online study groups was extremely low. And by that I mean nobody, unfortunately. But that did follow a similar trend of low engagement across all supports. So tutorials, MSc drop-in, online forums, engagement with all of these supports was extremely low. So naturally enough, when we moved to this coming year, we wanted to look into this and see how we might improve the engagement. So the department surveyed tutors at the end of the year to see their experience of online support. There were some pros, but there were a lot of cons as well. One of the pros is one of the things that came up earlier today, actually. Those students that, while there was low engagement, those students that did engaged very well, engaged more often. And there were other helpful things. Tutors been able to share their screen on Teams, meetings could be recorded, etc. But of course, there were the usual cons. Connectivity problems were an issue, and of course, the inability to see students' work. But with some of the talk that's gone on with collaborative whiteboards, etc., I'll be interested to look into some of those things. So, looking ahead to this year, we're planning to move our study groups online to Microsoft Teams. Now, Stephen did a really good outline of this in a talk there just before the break, so I won't bore you with the details of Teams too much, but there's just two things. The tabs at the very, very top, I'm sorry if that's a bit small, but essentially at the top there is a Files tab there where lecturers or students within their own team can upload files, upload work. So you could take a picture on your phone, upload it to the Files tab where your private team could take a look. The channels on the left-hand side is what Pádhraic is going to chat a bit about now. And this is going to be really important for our study groups. So Pádhraic, I'll throw it across to you to talk a bit about the private channels that you ran.
Yeah, thanks, James. Hi, everyone. So like James mentioned at the start, I was teaching a CERT course last semester, and this was how I recreated my class environment in MS Teams. So pre-COVID, I would usually start my class just like a regular lecture. It would just be myself talking in front of the class, in front of a blackboard. And to recreate this in MS Teams is actually pretty straightforward. You can just start a meeting with everybody in the general channel. But after that, I normally wanted to get students into small groups, and then they would work on some problems related to the material we just covered. And then I would just walk around the classroom and answer any questions that students had. And to recreate that in MS Teams, I set up these private groups there. And this is actually the part that James and Rachel will be recreating for their study group. So there was about 4 to 5 students in each of these groups. And because they're private, a student could only see a group that I assign to them. So when I'm telling everybody that it's time to go into these groups, they all know exactly where to go because they can only see one option for them. So it kind of it streamlines that side of it. Looking a bit closer into these groups, just looking at, you can see here in group A, you can see that the students themselves have set up their own meetings. And in these meetings, they would share files and talk to each other about a problem sheet that was based on the material we just covered in the general meeting with everybody. And I would periodically jump in and out of each meeting to answer questions that people had, just like I would do in a normal classroom setting. I found these private study groups to have much more engagement actually than the traditional lecture styles. There might be a few reasons for that, but I think one of the reasons was that I actually knew the students pretty well by the time we moved into online teaching. So I could actually group the students together with people that I already knew they were pretty comfortable with. So this kind of created a nice friendly environment inside these private groups. And the feedback from students was also pretty positive on these small groups. A lot of the students told me that they were more comfortable asking questions in front of a small group, especially of their peers, as opposed to just asking the question, not only in front of me, but in front of the entire class. They found just a small group is a lot less intimidating to pose questions and discussion. So that's really all I want to say. Just before I pass it back to James, I wanted just to mention quickly that there are other apps out there with a similar functionality to this. I know breakout rooms is used quite a bit in Zoom, and they are quite similar. But I would say like a big advantage that the MS Teams has over Zoom is that any of the files that students shared in a session or any chat logs, they will remain in those groups for when they return. So it's more like a private workspace in that sense, and it's a lot more permanent than some of the breakout rooms that other apps have. Yeah, but that's all I want to say. I'll pass you back to James now.
Super. Thanks a million, Pádhraic. Yeah, so our plans for next year, based off some of that, we're planning to move our computer science study groups online to Microsoft Teams, and the department is also planning to expand these study groups to all first year students to get them involved. Part of the theory of that is, as we said, when students eventually come to engage with these online supports, then they engage more often and well. So it was one of the bits of feedback came up in our focus groups as well, and it's if you can get students engaged early, they will engage more later on. So we are going to move the computer science ones online to Microsoft Teams. Students will be signed up, and just like Pádhric's system there, they'll be put into private channels within a single team that they can use as a collaborative space. So they can run private meetings within that channel where they can discuss ideas with their peers. As Pádhric said, they're working in small groups. They feel more comfortable asking questions, and tutors will drop into these channels once a week. So the idea would be that myself and Rachel would have a specified time to check in with one of these meetings. But our hope would be, of course, that even outside of those meeting time with tutors, that students would use the team as a private meeting space in their own time as well. Because one of the big benefits, as Pádhraic said, there is that the team remains there permanently. Our existing face-to-face model will be maintained with regards prep work. Students will know that they're expected to come with some work done to discuss, and they can share their screens if they can, or discuss work by placing photos in the files tab. So there'll be a files tab within their own private team that only their team can see the work that's put into it. And as was mentioned earlier on, we might look into some of those collaborative whiteboards or maybe OneNote as well. And tutors can monitor attendance via logs. So within a meeting, it is possible to download the attendance. The idea would be we would be able to intervene early if students start to become disengaged in the groups. Just for anybody using Teams, it might be worth noting that those attendance logs at the moment can only be downloaded as the meeting is going on. But I've been told it's in development by Microsoft that those logs will be able to be downloaded afterwards. So hopefully that will be coming in the future, maybe useful for monitoring the engagement. Yeah, I think that's about everything we have to say. There's some contact information if you want to contact any of us. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, James and Pádhraic, for that. Really interesting, particularly from my own point of view, in the sense that I'm not very familiar with Teams, so there's lots of things there, potential, I think, for people to look at. One kind of question stroke comment that has come in is about the perceived relevance, if you like, of mathematics, particularly for computer science students. Have you done things to try and adapt, you know, how you kind of pitch the relevance of mathematics in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the computer science department, there are two other tutors over there that are kind of like our ICT project cousins, and they're working on, again, ICT retention within the computer science department. And we worked with them to draw up a document about the relevance of each of the computer science studies modules in their maths modules, and vice versa. So we also made up a list of the modules that computer science studies students would be doing and the relevance of each of mathematical topics in those. Some of the feedback that we got from previous computer science studies students was that by the time they got to fourth year of computer science, they saw the relevance of maths, but in first and second year, they didn't. So one of the things we're trying to tackle is to find the relevance that they saw in their fourth year and communicating that to the first and second years. And we hope to do that through lectures, and we've forwarded those documents to the lecturers so that they can drive that home to their students as well.
Another question is around the kind of initial introduction to Teams. As I said, I'm not very experienced in myself, but others, as one comment in particular has mentioned how the initial kind of introduction seemed to be a little bit unintuitive and clunky for students. Have you done anything to try and help students, or do you have any suggestions how to help overcome some of that, perhaps?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I suppose for our students who've already been with us, they've been used to Microsoft Teams when they used it last year. We didn't do anything, I suppose, in second semester last year when everything moved to Teams online. I think, like everyone else, we were caught a bit on the hop with any induction training or anything. But certainly for this year, when we do orientation for our study groups, they will be taken into a group and given a more thorough run through, a bit like the one we've done there. I know what you mean in terms of the layout of it. We found it a bit unintuitive to start, but it's certainly one of those things when you get used to it, it makes real sense. Particularly what Pádhraic was talking about was the channels. That was something for a long time we were doing everything in what they call the general channel, which is everybody in your team in the one place. But a bit like what Stephen mentioned earlier on, splitting your channels up into a general announcements channel, a forum for students to talk with each other, maybe one to post resources. Splitting it up and segmenting it there kind of makes it a lot less daunting, I feel, for engaging it and working in it. So that'd be the best bit of advice I would have.
There is a kind of a follow-up as well about the groups and what you were saying there about setting up those kind of almost permanent groups throughout. One of the earlier speakers mentioned the idea that in the first instance, students were able to set up their own groups. Is that possible, or is that predetermined?
So in terms of our study groups, absolutely. We encourage students to come to us with pre-formed study groups if they want to remain with friends, etc. So if they contact us, we can very simply add them into the team and add them into a private channel. That's no problem. In a more general sense, as long as you have Office 365 and the Teams app, you can set up your own private teams as well. So that's not a problem if students want to do that privately. But from our point of view, if there are pre-formed groups that come to us, it's extremely easy. It's just a case of getting an email and signing them up into the private groups.
Okay, thank you. As I said, perhaps one extra comment is that we certainly witnessed a drop-off in all the supports that were available over lockdown as well. So you're not alone in that sense.
Yeah, we're glad. It's not just me.
But it's really interesting about how then, to try and still encourage that kind of collaborative approach, which I think is obviously essential.
Yeah.
And using some of the functionalities in Teams to develop that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's definitely opportunities to even do some things better than what we were doing in face-to-face, and I think, yeah, we found that Teams, and I know Pádhraic has found Teams really, really good for some of those things.
Okay, thank you both very much.
Thanks a million. Thank you.
I'll pass back to Claire.
Thank you.